20 сентября, суббота, переход Сырым-Маштакова.
The Russia-Kazakhstan border has been turned into a parking lot for nearly 2 months. These massive truck queues you see are not just a simple problem with customs. Now Putin's entire Russian myth, that image of everything being normal in Moscow, it's all stuck in a customs form, a truck park, and is now fully collapsing. This situation is expected to cause severe shortages in Russia. Moscow and St. Petersburg are among the cities that will be most affected by the crisis. This means shelves are running out more and more. Now this crisis is impacting all areas, from shopping malls and supermarkets to technology stores, affecting everything from basic necessities to luxury consumption. Reports from the field describe the situation as chaos and collapse. Even Russian state media could not hide the situation, admitting that nearly 10,000 trucks were being held up at the border. The Russian Federal Customs Service states that controlled crossings have been opened. However, drivers on the ground report that official statements do not reflect reality. Drivers say that everyone, including those carrying cargo that fully complies with their documents, is waiting in line. Drivers who have been stranded for weeks, even nearly 2 months, report that they have run out of money, cannot meet their basic needs, and have been forced to abandon their vehicles. This situation has led to chaos and fights in the region. While drivers confirm that everything is at a standstill, regardless of the goods list, an interview with Irina, the wife of a driver from Irkutsk, reveals the tragedy at the border. Irina describes the situation as a nightmare and great chaos, stating that they have been stuck since September 10th and that fights and accidents have occurred. Irina explains that she lost her husband in the second week. He couldn't even answer his phone, that the drivers have run out of money, and that they cannot meet basic needs such as toilets or food. She adds that her husband had to leave the truck with his boss's permission, that he is now without a salary, and that the family is mired in debt. Most importantly, Irina, annoyed, flatly denies media reports that normal goods, not subject to sanctions, are passing through, emphasizing, no, that's not true, that her husband was stranded despite transporting goods not subject to sanctions, tableware. The 3 points where this chaos is most intense are identified as the Bugristoy, Veseloyarsk, and Petukovo border crossings. The crisis is so serious that, according to local Telegram chats, even taxi drivers can no longer pass through the area. Driver Igor claims that the real problem is not inspections, but a systemic corruption crisis and power struggle. He states that trucks are not actually inspected at the checkpoint, but are simply held up. In this chaotic environment, pomegals, middlemen, have emerged, demanding $300 to $1,000 per truck to speed up customs procedures. Igor, a driver from Orenburg, refutes the November 1st reports that crossings began on Putin's personal orders, saying, "They say only Gagiev's logistics companies are crossing. They claim they paid $700 per truck and weren't even checked at customs." According to a report by locknews.ru, there are truck drivers who have been stranded for over 47 days. According to experts, the only outcome will inevitably be an increase in goods prices. In other words, a shortage crisis is erupting in Russia. Now, many Russian cities, including Moscow and St. Petersburg, could be severely affected by this crisis. Medical supplies shipments, containing both simple painkillers and equipment used in intensive care, were also left in those trucks. Thousands of trucks loaded with goods from China are currently trapped on Kazakh territory. Kazakh customs authorities have suddenly tightened controls on cargo bound for Russia. This is diplomatic language. The real-world meaning is, the border is closed. So why is Kazakhstan risking its most important ally and neighbor? The answer is not betrayal, but geopolitical necessity. This is a rebellion and a deliberate shift in alignment. Kazakh President Tokayev never openly supported Russia's invasion of Ukraine. As early as 2024, Kazakhstan explicitly declared that it would comply with Western sanctions. This was a clear warning to Moscow. These words did not fall on deaf ears. Kazakhstan is actively abandoning Russian equipment and technology. The state railway company signed a massive $600 million locomotive modernization agreement with the American company Wabtec. In energy, dependence on Rosatom is ending. Doors are opening for French, South Korean, and Chinese companies for new nuclear power plant tenders. However, the real geopolitical earthquake is hidden on the map. The name of Kazakhstan's new strategy is Middle Corridor. This is a network of railways and sea routes stretching thousands of kilometers, starting from China's Xinjiang region, crossing the Caspian Sea and reaching Europe via Turkey. Look closely at this map. The Russian Federation has been deliberately bypassed with surgical precision. Putin's Eurasian Economic Union myth is being dismantled by a key member of that very union. Kazakhstan now positions itself not as a satellite state of Moscow, but as the hub of the new Silk Road between East and West. The irony is that this move is likely being made with Beijing's tacit approval. China may stand with Putin ideologically, but economically it wants stability. Russia's railway sabotage and customs chaos are a burden on China's trillion-dollar Belt and Road project. Beijing will not put all its eggs in Putin's basket. The middle corridor is a perfect plan B for Beijing. Now, let's take a step back. Let's zoom out and fully explore China's ideology, which we mentioned earlier. Because here, a game even bigger than Kazakhstan's betrayal is unfolding. Let's ask ourselves this simple question. Kazakhstan is a country whose economy is largely dependent on both Russia and China. Why would it stop goods coming from China? Why would it risk antagonizing Beijing, the world's largest manufacturing power? Analysts suggest that a move of this scale could not have been made without at least Beijing's tacit approval. This brings us to the next stage. This is a scenario that some analysts might call superpower betrayal. Let's consider this scenario. China is not happy about Russia losing the war in Ukraine. This is a source of instability for Beijing and a burden that undermines Beijing's global trade. China sees Putin as no longer an asset, but a liability. But China cannot openly abandon Russia. It cannot openly take a stand against Putin. This would damage the image of a united front against the West. So, what does it do? It uses a proxy. China appears to be using Kazakhstan. If this scenario is correct, Beijing may have signaled to Tokayev, close that border, cut off Russia's lifeline, we've got your back. This changes the entire dynamic of the situation. It means Putin is being trapped not only by the West, but also by China, whom he calls his unlimited friend. Now let's try to understand the fundamentals by simply showing you this. Now look at that map once more, and ask yourself this question. Where is Russia? Nowhere. This route deliberately bypasses the Russian Federation, its massive Trans-Siberian line, with surgical precision. It leaves it completely out of the equation. Kazakhstan now positions itself not as a satellite state of Moscow or a transit country, but as the center of the new Silk Road between East and West. This is Putin's worst nightmare. So how did Tokayev dare to put a country that has been orbiting Moscow for decades on such a bold path? Behind this decision lie four brutal truths that the Kremlin can no longer deny. When Putin invaded Ukraine, he also declared war on his own image as a transit country. Since that day, Russia has become an unpredictable risk rather than a stable bridge. Kazakhstan is not an isolated, landlocked country like Russia. The lifeblood of its economy depends on massive oil and gas fields operated by Western giants such as Chevron, ExxonMobil, and Shell. Kazakhstan wanted to be exempt from secondary sanctions. That queue of 10,000 trucks at the border was the first and most tangible result of this decision. The middle corridor is the permanent monument to this decision. The most ingenious and ironic point here may be this. Kazakhstan may be making this move with China's tacit approval. Although Beijing politically supports Putin's adventure in Ukraine, Xi Jinping is more of a ruthless businessman than an ideologue. And his trillion-dollar Belt and Road project requires, above all, predictability and stability. Putin's Russia can no longer offer either. Railway sabotage in Russia, customs chaos, and the general instability created by the war pose an unacceptable risk for Chinese goods bound for Europe. China is smart enough not to put all its eggs in Putin's basket. Therefore, Beijing may be diversifying its routes. This middle corridor, which bypasses Russia, is a perfect plan B for Beijing. Finally, this corridor is not only economic, but also deeply political. The middle corridor creates a new geopolitical axis that connects not only China to Europe, but also the Turkic states of Central Asia to the Caucasus via the Caspian Sea, and from there to Anatolia. This is a new power block rising with the key of China and Turkey, bypassing the historical spheres of influence of Russia and Iran. With this move, Tokayev is turning his face towards the West, and his Turkish allies in the south, breaking away from Moscow's orbit not only economically, but also politically. Putin has burned so much military and political capital in Ukraine that he can no longer control even his own backyard. This is a development that deepens the chasm between Putin and the Russian people. While Putin was giving speeches on television about a multipolar world and strong allies, those allies were strangling the Russian people's basic needs. The people see this. They see that Putin's words are empty, that the empire is naked, that those he calls allies are actually enemies. This is a geo-economic trap, and Putin has fallen right into the middle of it. When a country is at war, the collapse of hospital logistics is devastating not only for health, but also for morale. And at the most basic level, the cheap Chinese goods used by the Russian people in their daily lives are about to disappear from the shelves. This blockade means that more and more shelves will be empty every day. First, luxury goods will disappear. Moscow's elite will no longer be able to find imported watches, expensive perfumes, or special imported wines. This wave of panic will spread to the middle class within a few weeks. People will be unable to repair their cars, and months will pass without being able to replace their broken phones. Then, the most dangerous threshold will be crossed. Basic necessities will disappear. Everything from baby diapers to refrigerators, from furnace filters to toothbrushes, will either be unavailable or sold at exorbitant prices. And that's when the cost of Putin's war will truly enter people's kitchens, bathrooms, and the very fabric of their lives for the first time. These trucks are not just carrying luxury goods, they carry spare parts that keep the Russian automotive industry afloat, microchips at the heart of the defense industry, and medical supplies needed by hospitals. This blockade shattered Putin's economic illusion. Logistics experts report that drivers are now seeking longer and more expensive routes via Mongolia, which is exponentially increasing costs and delays. The experts concludes, it depends on how long a particular retailer's cargo is held up at the border. Add the increased escort cost to the lost time. I think it will increase by 5 to 10%, he concludes. The Moscow Times Russian service, citing importers and entrepreneurs in its report, said that mass inspections of cargo shipments at Russia's border with Kazakhstan have halted a significant portion of imports and could soon lead to shortages of consumer goods. Logistics and freight companies estimate that 10 to 25% of all consumer imports from China are currently stuck at the border. China accounts for about 40% of Russia's total goods imports, meaning that 4 to 10% of consumer imports could be affected. All of this signals a deep, systemic crisis for Putin and Russia. Remember Putin's contract. Don't get involved in politics, and I'll increase your prosperity. With the war, that contract had already changed. Don't get involved in politics, and I'll at least maintain your current situation. Kazakhstan's move tore up that last contract. There is no longer any promised prosperity. There is no longer any preservation of the current situation. Now there are only empty shelves and panic. This is the war physically reflecting directly on the daily lives of civilians in Moscow. Putin's propaganda can talk about imaginary victories won in Ukraine, but propaganda cannot fill an empty refrigerator. Propaganda cannot convince a mother who cannot find shoes for her child. Propaganda cannot calm a man who cannot get to work because his car has broken down. And this is Putin's greatest fear, because when a people loses its bread, it also loses its fear. To understand the roots of this crisis, we must go back to 2022, to the beginning of the war. When the West isolated Russia from the global system, the Kremlin invented a Plan B, parallel import. The key elements of this plan were China and the eastern trade routes. In reality, this was a state-sponsored smuggling operation disguised as a legal front. A German-made engine part, an American microchip, or the latest iPhone would first be legally sold to a front company in Armenia, Kyrgyzstan, or most importantly, Kazakhstan. Entry into that country was entirely legal. Then the goods would pass through customs and be transported by truck from that allied country to Russia. Thanks to the fake union Putin called the Eurasian Economic Union, these trucks would pass through the border without any problems. And so, despite the sanctions, you could find the latest iPhone in a Moscow shopping mall or the latest Mercedes part at a St. Petersburg repair shop. This system was the pillar of Putin's economic stability. The system was running smoothly until Kazakh customs authorities suddenly decided to tighten inspections. According to logistics experts, almost all sensitive cargo is now subject to full inspection. The domino effect created by this blockade is so severe that panic on the ground is palpable. Many drivers, fearing the inspections, are either pulling their trucks into parking lots and waiting, or desperately changing their routes by seeking alternative, longer and more expensive routes through Mongolia. This is not a delay, it is a blockade. And the consequences of this blockade will not only be an economic blow to Russia, it will herald a deepening, multi-layered systemic crisis. The trucks waiting at that border are not just carrying iPhones or luxury handbags, they are the vital arteries that form Russia's lifeline. Inside them were Chinese-made spare parts that were keeping the automotive industry, already in crisis due to sanctions, alive. But they are gone now, and the issue is not limited to cars. Those trucks were also carrying microchips that are at the heart of many defense systems, from missile systems to tanks, radar networks to communication devices. Western intelligence and defense analysis reports have been documenting for months how dependent Russia's war economy and defense industry are on such dual-use technology transfers. Now this wheel has also come to a halt. This is no longer just a blockade. It is a scenario of controlled collapse. So, what will Putin do now? Will he threaten brotherly Kazakhstan? If he does, he will push Kazakhstan completely into the arms of China or the West. Can he risk opening a new front? Will he beg? This would destroy his image as a strong leader. Will he remain silent? This would be an admission of defeat. Putin has been checkmated by his most trusted ally, in a trap of dependency that he himself created. And the drivers waiting at the border, the manufacturers unable to get their goods, the Russian people staring at empty shelves, they all see this reality. They see how empty Putin's promises are, how even his allies don't take the Great Russia dream seriously. The Kremlin's propaganda is melting away in the face of the reality of the truck queue. How do you think Putin will respond to this strategic ally trap? Or has he run out of responses? We look forward to your opinions and analyses in the comments. Thank you for watching.